All right, everyone, welcome to Tuesday Night Studio Soup. Thank you so much for being here, and we are so excited to talk with these amazing artists this evening. What you just heard was a song by one of our studio artists, Adam Gaxiola, and we thank him for sharing his music with us this evening. Also, you got to see some of the work that you'll see throughout the evening tonight as we talk about art and art process with some amazing artists. Thank you so much for being here. We love that we're still engaging with our artists and our community throughout this time. So right now I'm going to invite all of our amazing artists right back to the stage, as we like to call it, with our host, Peggy Reevy, and then Ann Weber, Marie Thibault, and Maggie Tennyson. Thank you for being here. Thank you for wanting to Zoom with us this evening, and I'll be back in the wings. Have a great day.
Hi, thank you, Amy. Thanks for that. And hi, and welcome to Studio Soup. My name is Peggy Reevy. And I think you guys know by now what Studio Soup is about. It's a place where artists talk to each other about their process, how they make work, inside their head and their heart and their studio. It happens that they begin something, and at a certain point, it seems like a finished piece of work. Tonight, I am just really excited and proud to have these three amazing artists here. It's Ann Weber, a sculptor, Maggie Tennyson, a painter, and Marie Thibault, also a painter. All three of these artists are in the midst of careers full of shows and exhibitions and sales and reviews and residencies and fellowships here in this country and abroad. All three of them are abstract artists, and they have focused over time on what they are looking for in their art and how to find it. The result is, masterful and this very distinctive art, so that you would not have, you've seen the slides tonight. You would not mistake one of these artists for the other. Just by looking at those slides, each of them, the work is identifiable easily as either work by Marie or Maggie or Ann. So I want to begin with you, Maggie, tonight. I want to ask you a question first. Maggie, you and I have known each other a long time.
Yeah.
I knew you when you were in the studio at the Lofts in San Pedro. And that was a really, it's a co-op. It's a very active hive of art, and you were in a bustling city. And you moved. You made a big move. And now you're in the desert. And I picture it being very silent and very different. You've always talked about how the environment affects your work, which I assume means also your process. And I wonder if you can talk about that.
Oh, well, thank you. When I was at the Loft is a space that sits right on the harbor. And I had a upstairs studio, and I looked down on trucks delivering stuff all day long. And my work at the time was very architectural, had a lot of grids and square formations of the city, both from above and looking through. And, I thought that was going to be it. But then I moved out here. And so it's almost like I don't go out for it. I don't expect it to happen, but suddenly everything affects me. So the triangular shapes come from the mountains. The lines come from striations that's formed in the rocks. And usually what I like to say is each one of those lines reflects how I feel that nature forms. And out here, we get flash floods, we get earthquakes. Of course, in LA, yeah, you get all of that. But all of those things coalesce and form the land. So even the winds, we have big, heavy winds that move the sand and carve things out of the sand. So there are some weird, fantastic canyons. it's amazing. You're going along, you're hiking along, and suddenly you come across all these striations that are purple and white and green, and you're going, how did that happen? And it's over a long period of time. So it's layer upon layer upon layer. And I think that reflects actually how I process everything in my life. Everything in my life seems to come to me slowly. It's not, I don't come to things fast. I have a slower process. And so that layering and that line and that striation that I do is very much a part of who I am and how I come to things and how I form color.
I'm interested though, that I would think that part of your process now is taking a walk in the desert.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's yeah, it's definitely looking,
Yeah, so
being in it, not going, oh, there's a mountain, I'm going to draw a mountain. No. It just is being in it and totally wrapped in it. Yeah.
I just want to say one more thing about this, and well, I'm sure other people have questions for you too. I would say, I'm not an abstract painter, but I would say that your painting of the three is the most purely abstract in the sense that it does not appear to me to refer to things that are in the world in any way. And so it seems to me like going to the desert maybe puts you in a place where you're sort of looking at from the end of the universe somehow. It's more about stuff that isn't visible at all.
I'm always interested in when geometric shapes started in art, geometric abstract. And I actually got I don't know what it was. It was a YouTube. And it was an art historian, and he was talking about these squares that are on the walls in the caves. And where did they come from? I mean, these people were not like, they didn't live in a world like me. So how did they get this geometric shape? So I'm interested in that. And I'm also interested in how meditation can be almost directly formed out of those geometric, not formed, that's a bad word, but it comes from that.
So yeah, so meditation, I do remember you saying that was part of your process.
Very much.
Yeah,
very much.
Thanks. So Anne, I want to tell everybody, if you haven't looked at Anne's website, there is a wonderful video of her striding through the streets of Rome on a fellowship over there. And what she's doing is she, on her way to the Sistine Chapel or the Colosseum or some other site, like having an audience with the Pope. No, she is striding from one dumpster to the next and collecting cardboard for her work. And it's a really great video because there's nobody else in the streets. I don't know if it was early morning or what, but here's this tall woman in a black coat moving very determinedly from one Roman dumpster to the next. So, and I was thinking this business of collecting I would think would play a part in your process, like what's going on with you when you're doing that. That is part of your process. Can you talk about that?
Yes, and in fact, dumpster diving in Rome is it's the best dumpster diving in the world. And it's because they separate the garbage. There's 3 big cans, big dumpsters in the street. One has cans and bottles, and the other has yucky garbage, and the third one has pure, unadulterated cardboard. Unless you get some jerk that just puts it finally in the wrong thing. So, and the other thing was that nobody cared what I was doing. I overdressed anyway because I lived in New York City during the 80s, so I never quite got out of the disco look. But anyway, I would just be strolling along and sticking my head, because you had to there was a slot, like a mail slot. You'd have to sort of stick your head in, and then you could see what was in there and pull out what I wanted. But yes, now my dumpster diving is very prosaic because I get almost all my cardboard from Trader Joe's. And it's the one up on Western, and the staff, because I used to go at a certain time in the morning after going to the Y. And so the same staff would be there. And one time, this one woman, they all knew what I was doing, and they would post the images of my announcements that I would give them in the staff bulletin board. And there was this one woman, and she would say, oh, make me a unicorn. And I'd say, Christina, I don't make unicorns. I make abstract sculpture. And so fast forward to the coronavirus, I was in there and practically on my knees, thanking them for being open and taking such good care of them. And I said, oh, I just wish there was some way I could pay you back. And Christina says, make me a unicorn. And so I did. And so about a month later, I took it in, and everybody in the whole place was screaming. So that was one of the rare times that I have made something specific.
When you're walking along, are you thinking when you collect stuff, do you think, oh, that's going to be a good thing I can do this with that or whatever? I just wonder or if you already know what you're going to do with whatever it is you find.
No, I'm very selective, and people say, oh, I just bought a bed. I got a great big mattress here. I'll drop off the cardboard. I say, no. I'm very, very particular. Certain colors. I do use a lot of black or a lot of white. I don't use brown cardboard very much anymore. But, I wanted to respond to something that Maggie said. And okay. When I think about the fact that, I think I'm the elephant in the room here because, in some ways I was thinking, now, why did Peggy put the three of us together other than being abstract? But this last series that I did has a lot of white with just small amounts of yellow and red and blue. And there's a reason for that. And it came from Mondrian's painting called Broadway Boogie Woogie. Yeah. So I'm thinking about, well, yes, there is a connection because Maggie works with straight lines, and there's Mondrian. It couldn't be more angular. And then I am not using his angles, but I'm using the color combination. And this will give you a little bit of an idea about my process. And for instance, I was having a solo show at Harbor College. The curator is Ron Linden, and he had written a piece about my work. And he was describing it as really jazzy and syncopated. And he was using the language of jazz to talk about my work. And he brought up Broadway Boogie Woogie by Mondrian. And I'm thinking, Mondrian? And so I rush home, I look at the painting on the internet, and there is this really wild painting that is not exactly like what we usually think of with a Mondrian, and it just had a whole lot of energy. And so I rushed back up to the studio and started making a piece. I only had about 10 days left before the show opened. So I came home and I made this piece and really thought about it as a piece that was commenting on Broadway Boogie Woogie. So Ron Linden named the show Pedro Boogie Woogie, and because of the sort of jazzy experience. But then the other thing that I started thinking about, especially with the coronavirus, was that because I was using these colors and referencing this Mondrian Broadway Boogie Woogie, and I'm thinking, these are not really joyful times. But when that painting was created in 1943, it couldn't have been created at a worse time. I mean, they're just finding out about the Holocaust. People were dying left and right. In the war, nobody had any money, nobody had any heat in their studios, and yet Mondrian makes that incredible painting. So there you go.
So Marie, yeah, I have actually Well, I mean, I've never had a chance to really talk to you, but I have followed you for a long time. And I've also have read a lot about you because if one Googles you, there's a lot to read. And it was interesting. One of the interviews I read where you talked about, and since we're talking about process, I thought this was really interesting that you work with about 10 canvases in your studio at a time that you're working on, which I thought was really interesting process. And they are of a heroic size very often. And I wondered how this works in terms of your process.
Well, I use a lot of layers in my work. And so usually I go in the studio and, proceed with the next layer on whatever painting suggests that it needs a layer. So it's a fairly intuitive process. And because I work with oil and with glazing, there is time that, needs to happen for them to dry between the layers.
Okay.
And I also paint very fast. And so if I didn't have a lot of canvases to spread out, my energy on, I'm afraid I would burn right through it, too fast. So, I mean, I admire the methodology of Maggie and Anne, who have a process that's incremental. And mine is more gestural, it's more sporadic. I can pour completely, obliterate a canvas, or I can project on it or carve into it, and it's unpredictable.
Mhm.
And that's exciting, but it's also problematic. So I think that's why I also work on a lot of canvases, because several of them get sacrificed along the way, because I do try to make radical moves on each painting.
So when something's not working, you just, because I was wondering about that. Certainly something I do is you will just paint over it and begin again.
Yeah, I will cancel it out with another structure. And sometimes by doing that, there's a really interesting complexity that happens. And sometimes it, doesn't work. But because I let each layer dry, I can also erase. I can take the paint off and put more paint back on again. So there's a lot of removal and addition in the layers. This painting that is up here was the first painting after COVID happened. And it's really fractured, it's really broken apart. And I think the space has shifted since last spring. And I'm trying to grapple with the psychology of it. And it's somewhat more disembodied and aerial view space. I feel like I'm connected to a global pandemic, a global perspective. And the abstraction is sort of like it's kind of the way I'm feeling about an out-of-body experience, or that there's awareness that we're all in this floating space right now. Most of my work is more grounded with the horizon line from the harbor where we live. So you can see that as the ocean horizon line, and the industrial landscape has been a consistent grounding point in a lot of the work.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's that interesting, the way you, I can recognize, even though they are not literally redrawn, the shapes of the harbor and all those openings that we could go into. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I did read that you said that I really thought was interesting in terms of process was, when you are stuck, as we all get sometimes, that you will just go in and keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really interesting. You just do it anyway. Can you talk about that and why that works, rather than going and hiding under the bed?
I'm not sure I'm even doing that as much as I used to. My default position now is drawing, so I go and I just do a lot of drawing and collage. And throughout the pandemic, the early months of it, it was difficult for me to paint at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I just did a series of maybe 30 or 40 works on paper. Have done 2 large paintings and some small ones, but because the space has shifted, it's involuntary. And that's a product of my sensitive, like my oversensitive constitution, I guess, that I feel like I'm just all new information is coming in, and there's a lot of new stuff that's being processed. And I feel like there's a major shift that has happened in our psyches and the collective consciousness.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to arrange that and figure out how to structure that and incorporate that in the paintings. So it's like a new space, and like I said, it's involuntary. So I don't really have a choice about going back to doing something else. It just won't work that way for me.
Yeah.
So I have to move forward with what's going on now.
Amy, any questions from other people off stage?
I do. Thanks so much. Nicole asked a question for Maggie. Your paintings are radiant. Do you prefer to paint at a certain time of day? And then I have a couple other questions.
Oh, my best time in my aging process is in the morning, but I'll stay with it all day. I think that the bright colors come from the desert. I cannot get away from them. And it's the sun, the intensity of the sun that just bores into me. And so I think that's what's happening actually without my consent. Because every once in a while I'll go, okay, let's have a nice gray thing. And nothing happens. I can't. So it's a lot like what Marie said.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes you just don't have a choice. I think if you've been painting a long time and you have a lot of paintings behind you, a lot of artwork, as in Anne's case, is just this is how we move. We just move in this way and thinking about it all the time.
Thank you for
Okay.
sharing that. Thank you so much. I had another question for Marie, but I also wonder if the rest of you also want to answer this. Marie, you mentioned sketching and making drawings as part of your process. Is that the way you develop the idea, or is it a way of discovering the idea?
Oh, what an interesting question.
Hmm.
Mostly it's a way of discovering what sticks. There's this thing, like if it isn't sustainable, like you get an idea and you go, that's a great idea, I'm going to try to do it, but I can't sustain that inquiry. I can't sustain it. It flies away. So in the drawing, if I can sustain something over and it repeats and it gets clear, then I know it's, authentic and it wants to be painted. So my motto is draw until I have to paint, basically. It's not as much fun as painting, because painting is a really, really ecstatic activity for me because of the color and all the different forms I'm using. But the drawing is a way of researching the emotions, and also trying to test the imagery and the structures that I'm using.
Well, I want to respond to that, and especially because you said it was such that it's so energizing for you to paint, and that it sounds like, even though you've been painting for a few decades, that it still is something that is super exciting for you. But my process is excruciatingly dull. And Chuck Close talks about it. His process is also excruciatingly dull, because what he's doing is he's painting little dots of color inside these grids. So my feeling when people say, oh, it must just be so much fun to be in your studio, and it's not fun. It's not fun. It is work.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of other things for fun, but it is what I've chosen to do. And my process is that I have to come to the studio every day, but only 3 hours a day. And partly because I can make a lot of work in 3 hours. I also have to show up, because if you don't show up, you can't be there when inspiration strikes. Yeah, but even I don't even feel like I work with inspiration so much. I also feel that as a sculptor, all you have to do really is show up, because you know what you're going to do. Once I know what the armature, what the shape is, and it's just a matter of sitting there with the staple gun. Oh, and here's my tool. There it is. Have done will travel. I need this.
So when you decided to start working in cardboard, was that exciting when it suddenly dawned on you, oh, I'm going to use cardboard instead of clay?
exciting is too strong of a word, because when I came out of being a production potter, I was in upstate New York. I went to Purdue University. I learned how to throw from Marge Levy, my teacher who was from Pratt, teaching at Purdue University. Can you imagine what it was like as a 25-year-old coming out to the Midwest to teach ceramics in a ag school? But she was extraordinary, and being in the pot shop in 1970 was so high energy, and the idea of being a craftsperson. So I feel like in 1970 I fell in love twice. One was with the medium of clay, and the other was with the person sitting next to me on the potter's wheel, who I married about 6 months later because my parents flipped out that we were living together. And so we said, well, we'll get married the day after graduation. And so that nobody'd have to make more than one trip. And then we started a pottery studio, and we drove around the country and settled in Ithaca, New York.
Yeah.
Well, then I went to graduate school, and I came from being in New York City, being a production potter, and I was sick to death of it. And I took a class with Jim Makins, who was more of a one of a kind. He was working in clay in New York City at Greenwich Pottery. And he said, go to graduate school and go to California, because that's where all the interesting work is being done in the medium of clay. And sure enough, so I worked with Viola Fry at California College of Arts and Crafts, and she inspired me because of the size of the work that she'd done. I'd also seen her work at the Whitney in New York City. She was a person that felt that clay was not, she just ignored the issue of whether or not it was craft or art. She says it's art if you say it's art, and it certainly was. After I graduated, I knew I wasn't going to set up a pottery studio because it's super expensive. I wasn't going to sell anything. So I experimented and Viola says you're a beginning artist for the first 10 years out of school. So you just experiment. So I worked with a lot of different materials. I bought canvases and painted. I did printmaking at the community college. I got canvas from my father's canvas company from the Midwest, and I was making large forms like Claes Oldenburg, stuffing them with newspapers and plastic cans, and then I was doing paper mache.
So all these processes, as you've had them, it sounds like that was fun or like play for you or exciting as you found those.
No, it's not
Maybe
fun.
you need to,
Play.
Yeah.
It's not play. It's work. It's finding your voice.
yeah, it is. And you have found your
hard
voice.
work. It's very frustrating.
It is hard work.
Finally, after Nikki de St. Valley, after I got through I didn't want to work in paper mache. That was just too plebeian. And then I was moving to another studio, and I had all these boxes in the middle of the floor, and talk about plebeian paper mache being too crafty. Well, cardboard is almost even worse. But I thought about Frank Gehry making furniture. And that was my eureka moment. But I never really thought, I thought it would just be another material that I was experimenting with. But ultimately, it felt like it had infinite possibilities, and that there was a lot of different ways to use it. And that's when I figured out this staple gun. I used to have $20 from like hardware store.
Because I think a lot of times the materials are what can excite you. Like Maggie and Marie have been painting. You've been painting a long time. I mean, somebody could have come along and said, well, don't you think you ought to change your materials? This is getting a little boring, isn't it? So it's interesting to me. You have stayed focused really, I think all three of you have stayed focused. I have my own personal answer, but why do you keep looking for it in paint?
Why don't you talk about that, Maggie?
Wrapped up in a love affair with it, wrapped up in a love affair with color. How can I say it? Color just speaks and speaks and speaks, and it keeps unfolding. I mean, process is actually unfolding, unfold. Oh my God. That's why I have
Uh-huh.
that painting called Surprised by Joy, because I'm surprised. All of a sudden there's a surprise. And how can that be when you've been painting for so long?
I just want to agree with that, everything Maggie said. And it's the discovery, but the seduction of color, and also the meaning of color as you layer it and I use color more atmospherically, but also symbolically to evoke, psychological states and emotions, and to signify different states or different appearances of memory or the unseen. I mean, I'm going into it in a different way than descriptive color, but that's all experimental and it's very interesting. And painting also is so mysterious because of its use of space and time and nuance
Mm.
and how much history it's based on. And every time you make a painting, it brings up the whole history of painting. It
Mm.
carries all of that with it. It's endlessly interesting. So never bored. And I agree with Anne, it is very hard work. It can be drudgery, really. But the moments that you have those ecstatic moments where you discover something and it clicks and it's just the absolute beauty of it is so, sustaining. It's a really wonderful way to spend your time. I'm glad I chose to have this life because I'm never bored, but there's ups and downs, of course. And it is a lot of work and it's a lot of discipline to do
Yes.
that every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like to keep working when you're stuck. Maggie, yeah, I remember when you were, as you described, doing those kind of urban architectural type things, and they were dripping. They were drips. The lines were drips.
Mhm.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh yeah, that was my last of the oil paint. That was that was
That
me,
was oil paint? I didn't realize it.
the
Wow.
last bit of oil paint. Well, I had these
So that,
tremendous headaches, and so I had to switch to acrylic.
so switching over to dealing with, I mean, my experience was they're very, mostly perpendicular lines.
Yeah.
And what I see is when you went to the desert, aside from the color becomes so intense, the lines are like bending, they're bending all these ways. Maybe that's the light. I don't know, but I just really see this.
I think it's really the light, the way she's
Yeah.
using the light and metering the light with the incremental lines is so so beautiful. There's so much time and space within the orientation of the color, the gradation of the color, and the gradation of the intervals.
Yeah.
And that's where you really slow down to see the light and the time in her work. It's really beautiful. I also want to say that there's something interesting in Maggie's work because the materiality, when she switched to acrylic, I think the materiality, usually with acrylic, it's sort of a disappointing experience.
Yeah.
To go from oil to acrylic, but Maggie has made it a physical surface with the use of the lines. So it's tactile, like the way you would experience nature. And I mean, in Anne's work too, there's something that's transformed on the surface of the cardboard. So, you get the sense of the hand or the weaving, and the material has totally been transformed. And I think in my work, I'm not about illusion so much or transforming it. I'm about, slapping it on, and that's what it is. This is a pink spot, or, I mean, it is what it is. The material's obvious. But I think with Maggie and Anne, that the material has been used and worked with enough so that it has transformed somewhat in a good way.
I have a few more questions from the audience. I know I'm a
Great.
few minutes early, but I wanted to jump in here. And I think I have one for each of you. So Marie, there was just a quick question about the role of drawing when you talked about using drawings to get started. Are you using color drawings or graphite drawings?
I use these little marker pens, like ink pens. They're permanent markers that have a felt tip, like a brush tip.
Okay.
And all shades of gray. And so I work with that, and then it goes liquid. So then I'll work with ink or gouache on top of it. So it starts with on the inky line and it goes more liquid. That's the material I use.
Thank you. Maggie, there's a question from Lowell that says, how does your desert locale affect your composition? They're so wonderful. And he had another question about, do hummingbirds see more colors than we do as humans? And I'm just going to post that I have Googled it. And yes, for sure, they see way more colors than we could even imagine.
What, 2 million? There's
But yes, if you could talk about the desert, it's a very special place to Lowell as well. So how that affects your drawings a little bit more would be great.
it's the space here is so big because we live kind of away from the city. And so the space is big. So what happens on my paintings is the space gets big, and or I try to make it that way. Whatever it happens out here. I'm beyond figuring it out. I mean, I got the things of the stratifications of the rocks, and I got the things of the shapes of the mountains, and I got the things about the sky. I mean, we live in a bowl of blue. But after that, I just start to lose my mind. Like, it's here, and whatever's happening to me is happening to me.
Yeah.
And it's like Marie, I'm really grateful for the life that I have. I don't know what happened, but there it is. I don't know if that's probably not good enough for Lowell. But Lowell's been here, so he knows what I'm talking about.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And
beautiful.
there's some questions about your work. Does the color in your work come from the color of the cardboard only, or do you paint your pieces directly? I happen to know the answer to that, but not everyone does. And has the malleability of the cardboard affected your process?
The cardboard, the color from the cardboard comes from all the boxes. And I think people don't realize how many colored boxes there are. And I use the text and the color very consciously. So no, there's no paint involved. Way too messy. And yeah, I think about how the color interacts with the whole piece. And then the malleability. Well, cardboard is that's kind of the thing that's interesting about it, is that I can cut it into strips with my box cutter. And I can cut up a box in like 30 seconds, a minute.
Wow.
And I make the strips about 2 or 2.5 inches. And as long as the staple gun fits between can you see that? And I do take a strip of cardboard. Let me see, I got one right here. And I do curve it with my hands just a little bit. And then stapling it. So in some ways, it's not that far from my ceramic career in the sense of making like a giant coil pot. So I'm just stapling the strips together to create, I can go big.
I have one more question for Marie and Maggie. Maggie, your paintings really seem like the math of the desert. Does that make sense to you when somebody says that?
Sure, because it's math. It looks like it's mathematically oriented. Sure, that makes sense.
For Marie, how has inner light affected the mood in your painting?
Good.
It's really wonderful to hear you talk about the process right now. So how has inner light affected that?
Well, inner light of the painting, there's inner light of the mind. Well, if anybody saw the moon come up over the harbor last night, like I did, there's, this incredible spiritual light all the time that is happening on the horizon line, whether it's a cloudy day, a smoggy day, sunset, sunrise. There's this, really beautiful band of light that's where I start. I start with a band of light, which is the horizon line. And that is the color mood of that is different for each painting, as I'm trying to get a sense of maybe a seasonal shift or a memory of something, or something I actually did encounter on a walk, because I walk every day also. along the ocean and look at the sky to the ocean, to the horizon line mostly. But the inner light is the orientation, and then there are other types of light that happen sequentially on top of that. So that's establishing some type of orientation, but then there are other lights. And I think that those lights, like orange light or green light coming out of like the one you're looking at right now, are symbolic forms that represent banners or memories or realizations. It's hard to speak about it, but they're abstract symbols or signs. I think of them like flags that you might see in a Renaissance painting, a battle painting where everybody's going along and the horses have all the flags and there's banners everywhere in the sky. And I feel like there are these accoutrements, there are these other iterations of color light that happen on top of the one that's grounding you in this reality. So all I can say, I think it's a simultaneity that I'm after, some type of simultaneity of color.
You talk about looking for in your work, Marie, the sublime. And I was interested in you saying that it doesn't mean sublime in the sense of sitting on the beach and drinking a margarita. It's like, you know. But you had seemed to me that was a very transformative thing you were talking about.
A group of us have been discussing the sublime for many years. And, you know, it's like the discussion has been about the feminine sublime as opposed to the historic sublime, which is a male sublime. I mean, Maggie's work is actually, I think, more sublime than my work. You know, I think that my work is actually like theatrical at this point, you know, like the theater of contradictions or something. But the sublime is, you know, as we talk about it with the feminine sublime, is that you're engaged, you're immersed within an arena of instability. So, I mean, in the, my work is informed by, you know, environmental crisis that we are in, about sharing this world with other species, about the precarious situation and responsibility that we have. And so I feel that I'm always looking for a balance and imbalance, you know, what is precarious and what is teetering and how does it balance? Like Anne could probably relate to that. You know, like what is just like on the hinge of changing or flipping or about to change. And so that instability is a sense of like awe. You could get that, like, oh my goodness, you know, it's a little overwhelming. That's the sublime to some degree. And the feminine sublime is, as we are starting to talk about it, it's not really, you know, an art historical thing really yet, but we just talk about it. And there was a show curated by Constance Mallinson 2 years ago that was called The Feminine Sublime. And it's more that the point of view is that the viewer is immersed within the instability and surrounded by it, rather than the viewer who can point to it and overcome the danger of the great storm or the great abyss. So the feminine point of view, the feminist idea here is that we are co-present, we are existing within this arena of chaos.
Is there any way you could point to that in one of your, how about that painting behind you? Does that have?
So this one is meant to, the shield is the green, is meant to be the placeholder for the body. Below is an oceanic, you know, monsters or some type of the abyss, the underworld sort of space in my mind. There's the architecture that is referencing the containers on Terminal Island and the industrial harbor. And there's a figure 8, which is actually constructed with 2 radar dishes linked. So it's a hourglass and it's radar dishes. So it's a symbol of time and our inability to see. And the shield is really like we are surrounded by this. So I think, you know, this all comes about really intuitively. I don't think this through, and I just, you know, add elements as I go.
Right.
So I think this one would sort of represent that.
That piece makes me think of Hieronymus Bosch it's hard.
Oh,
for
I
me to
love
explain
him.
why. Yeah, yeah, he's wonderful. And some of the forms there, when you describe, like in your statement about the machinery ends up being destroyed and then made into new, you find beauty in all this machinery, even though it could be blocking things or mucking things up sometimes, because it looks beautiful when you paint it.
They're architectural structures. You know, I mean, the machinery, I don't really use actual machinery anymore. I did
Yeah.
for a while, like, you know, industrial ruins and so on, really specific.
Mhm.
I just allude to architecture now as a man-made structure. But I'm really interested in the sky form more than anything. Like what's going on in the sky? What's, you know, what are the messages coming, you know, like the medieval sky, like suns and weird banners, and just sort of, there's permeations in the abstraction that are, I think, less referential now to the immediate environment, but I still get inspired by the immediate environment, you know, the harbor and San Pedro and the ocean.
And in your what do you call it? The artist statement. By the way, artist statements are usually horrible, in my opinion. I think you all have great ones. Everybody should go on their websites. They're really great websites. But you say that your work is about memory and relationships and morality. And I thought that was really interesting. Can you talk about that?
Well, you know, let me give an example.
Okay.
About what's been happening with the coronavirus. And for example, my work is not political. And I would say my work is very personal. If I'm talking about balance, I'm talking about balancing acts that artists, that your whole life is defined by, you know, trying to find time to make work. You have to make a living. Sometimes you have a husband or two or three, and then you sometimes have a child. So all of these things are demanding your time. So I created these really large pieces at the beginning of the 21st century, of these really tall pieces. And my idea was that how tall can you make something before it falls apart or falls down, which is really a statement about how chaotic can your life get before something explodes. So when I think about, the coronavirus, I felt like there wasn't any point to making art. It felt like, things seemed so bleak. And then when the revolution came along, then art seemed even more pointless to me. But I kept working, and there were a couple of things that sort of sharpened my focus. And one of them is that even though I don't have anything going on right now because everything's been closed down and all the show opportunities and galleries and all that has stopped, I felt like I wanted to be ready to go when things open up, so that and then I also felt like it was time to put together a catalog, because I had oddly enough, I had a little extra money because I'm not traveling at all. I'm not going out. I'm not buying clothes. I'm not spending any money. So it felt like, oh, well, spend it on a catalog, or spend it on a full page ad in Artillery, because they gave me a super great discount, and they were struggling. So you feel like, that's where your money goes. But then I felt like I'd been making paintings called Boogie Woogie. There was, from last year, the Happiest Days of Our Lives, which is like, boy, does that, I created that work with no irony, but now it seems like it's nothing but irony. So, but then I thought, how can I connect my personal work that is about my relationships with people, and these were about graffiti, and that's another. So I felt like, do something with the titles. So when it came time to make titles for this work, there's one called "You Don't Need a Weatherman to Know Which Way the Wind Blows." I didn't make that with the idea of the weather underground or the movement or the revolution, but it felt like that was the right title for it. And then there was another piece called "Yes Sir, No Sir, Maybe Baby." And that also felt like it was a little nod to, we're going from this very formal, I mean, in the South, you had to say no, sir, or yes, ma'am. And that was, if you were a Black person, you didn't say that, you could get into severe trouble. So then all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe we are going to be in a place of change. And so maybe it is going to change again. So I felt some connection to the movement by using these titles. Another one is called "Dance Me to the End of Love," which is a Leonard Cohen song. And it felt like I felt so badly for all the people that couldn't see their boyfriend, or there's so many things that was on hold, or weddings, and so that piece sort of like, and also there's some kind of in the yield sign that, red, yellow, and blue are such powerful colors, and they can mean everything from anger to jubilancy. And so I feel like in some ways I want to be more general so that it can be more universal in a way, and I want my work to really be open to interpretation by the viewer.
Sure. No, that makes sense. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is because you guys all work in abstract, do abstract work, and I work with a narrative, and I couldn't figure out how you go to the studio when you don't have some story in your mind. But what I'm realizing is, as I have looked at your work and read about your, watched changes in your, and thought about it, I kind of the same. There's a thing that you're interested in, and that's the story that you want to go and do. You've seen all this light.
Exactly right, Peggy. That's exactly.
It is a narrative. It's an abstract narrative. I mean, it's totally a narrative for me. The unfolding of it is a narrative. I mean, the thing is it's not literal. And the other thing is it's simultaneous. There's sequential moves in the work, but it's meant to be a simultaneous relationship of all these things at once, like a gestalt. I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm thinking about Maggie's is it's very clear right in the beginning. My work is not clear when you first see it. It takes a long time to see it, and then it kind of unfolds and you get to see it over time. But Maggie's has a very clear impact, and then you can really spend time enjoying the space in it. There are different ways that time is embedded in it, but I think anything that has that kind of time and then leads the viewer through a reading is a narrative. It's just not a literal narrative.
Yeah, and Maggie, some of those is the color is especially in person so intense that it's almost aggressive. Really fantastic. You're saying, look at this, and that's really a sort of a story too, sort of a narrative too. I want you to see this is the way I feel about it. Yeah. Well, how about some questions? So, Amy.
Okay. I have a lot of them, so I'm going to try and get through a couple. I think one of the most interesting questions is about your dreams. Do any of you get inspiration from your dreams? And if so, in any ways that you could share that?
No.
Good answer.
Well, I've had dreams recently where I'm in the studio. That's my dream.
While we're teaching.
And I'm so happy. And I'm in the studio and I'm painting. Weird. I think it's coronavirus.
Tell me also, Maggie and Marie, but any of you, and I include Peggy in this, is not the intangible, the spiritual at the core of your work? That was a question from one of our audience members.
I think, yes. I saw that question and I think I'm ready to commit. I think that I really do feel spirituality is at the core of my work at this point. But it's really entrenched in the history of painting, you know, the way spirituality runs through that. And I'm always looking at medieval art. I'm looking at, Hieronymus Bosch. I'm looking at a lot of symbolic, illuminated manuscripts, things like this that are trying to depict the unknown. And abstraction has always, tried to make visible something that is invisible. And I'm getting more and more interested in that, even though there is a landscape space and landscape imagery. I'm trying to evoke the sense of this our consciousness, the simultaneity that we're in this living world, that we're co-present, we're sharing it with all these visible and invisible beings. The air is animated, the animals that come through, the history, the loss. But aletheia means not forgetting. It comes from Greek. It's like the effort not to forget. And these bird forms and animal forms that are in here are trying to be a tree of life form, really. And it's holding species that were illustrated by Audubon and so on, those forms that are now extinct. So that woodpecker and some of the birds that are in there, I actually tried to literally find elements, representing what was missing. And so the negative space of those shapes, which are created by stencils, are the holding spot for what is missing now in the ecosystem. So that's another thing that is happening in the sky form, is this, commemoration of the loss of diversity, I guess, in the ecosystem. So, it's, environmentalism, but I also think it's eco-feminist spirituality too.
I certainly relate to that idea of making visible something that is invisible. Even though my work is narrow, I still see that, which is a sacrament. That's the definition of a sacrament. Did we have more questions?
Yeah, I think
Wait, we have to hear Maggie's answer about spirituality.
I'm sorry.
Because it was for her too. I want to hear the. Do you feel like your painting is about spirituality?
Oh
Is that
God, yes, it absolutely is. Absolutely, there is no question. And the first notion of it is starting. So starting from a still space, or starting from a place that is not order, like not directed, no rules, that's the first. And then following the lead of some invisible force, which I have no name for, because like I said, we have color, we love shapes, we love lines, all that stuff. But behind that, that's just containership for the unknown.
Mhm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And yeah.
I have a couple continuum questions for you. They know that some artists have trouble starting a piece, as you were just talking, while others have trouble stopping on the work. Where do you all stand in that continuum?
I love that question. Wait a minute.
No, I'm pretty easy. I love to start paintings. I love living with them when they're very young. And after a while, they have so many layers and so many memories and so much history. It's really hard to finish them. It's always extremely hard to finish for me. So I think that's always been a problem.
Well, mine's done when the last staple goes in, so it's not really something that it's just a whole different mindset than when you're painting. But Maggie, why don't you speak about it?
Well, I mean, it's so impractical. It's such an impractical situation. I mean, I've been digging back into my old paintings going, oh, that didn't work. I ended it when I thought it was over. And so I go back to my high school experience as a painter. And I used to ask this teacher, am I done yet? Am I done? Am I done yet? I mean, she was so sick of me. And so these habits, they follow us sneakily along our lives. And we think, oh, I'm past that. But no, I'm not past that. If I'm bored with it, I think I'm done with it. And then I go back and I reiterate some of it. And I'm like, whoa, this is beautiful. What happened here? So now it's done. So that's kind of my mind. That's what I'm thinking. It's done when it says it's done, not when you say it's done. So, and I've done paintings where I've painted for a show and I thought, you've got to get a load of them out, and they're not done.
Mhm.
But
That's
in
a problem.
amongst them, there might be some really treasure going on.
Mm.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna ask one more question from the audience and then give it back to you, Peggy, for the last 10 minutes. Being a community art space and having community, over 50 artists up at Angels Gate, this question is intriguing. How much interaction do you each have with other artists like this versus how much time for you is solitary as an artist?
Well, I'll speak about that. During the coronavirus, you don't have anything. You don't have anything. I mean, I'm just happy that the studio stayed open, for God's sakes. And but normally, I love being around people. I love having dinner parties. I love going to openings. I love being with my artist friends.
Yeah.
It's kind of rare that we really talk about art per se. We might talk about other artists or a show we've seen, that kind of thing. But no, being connected it's one of the reasons why I moved to Los Angeles. I wanted a bigger picture. I wanted more opportunity, but I wanted to be able to see more art and new art that I wasn't familiar with.
So one of the things that coronavirus has done for me, sorry guys, I like to spin the positive, is it made me pick up the phone and say, call Marie, or just out of the clear blue sky. I'm not going to wait until somebody calls me. And so I'm calling more artists, and that in that way, I'm staying more connected, I think, than I was before. So I just want to throw that in.
I feel like I miss studio visits. I really miss traveling. I have a lot of friends in New York and San Francisco and Seattle and Texas, and I miss going to see artists, especially in New York. That was very sustaining for me, and it was, I went twice a year at least. But there's a silver lining. I mean, as much as we're Zoom exhausted, I've done studio visits a lot with friends on Zoom and phone conversations too. This summer we created a reading group that was really wonderful about abstract painting and about painting. I'm lucky to still be teaching, so I have conversations with my colleagues, not just about students, but about art and about painting. And also I have wonderful grad students, which they're teaching me as much as I'm teaching them, it feels like. So it's a very vital exchange. So I feel like just the one-on-one visits is hard, but I also feel like there's even more kind of sustained connection talking about art, because people are reaching out and creating kind of different formats to dialogue.
I have to say that the coronavirus has forced us to do what we had talked about doing, what we're doing right here in the flesh in Studio H at Angels. But I had no idea what Zoom was about. And and every time one of these things comes up, I kind of like, Judith is chasing me around, getting me to, to meet my timelines and everything. But it's like, I love it because I have gotten to talk to you people, other artists about art, because I really miss that. And I feel like even when we, like you said, Anne, when we got together, we didn't really talk about art. We'd be at a gallery and people would say, I don't know, maybe one thing, but it wasn't usually about what you're doing. So that's why, I really find this moving and important to me and very connecting. I want to say, Anne, I know that you have a great desire and a gift for creating community, because, you right away when you came down here, made a point to meet people and be able to have those kind of gatherings and dinners, other artists, so that you could do that. And I'm thinking now, it's perfect that you're making these figures because you're making these little friends for yourself to be in your studio. You're making a community for yourself.
They're not my friends. They're sculptures. They don't say a word. It's not the
Anyway.
same. Although
But it's
it is-
you're populating. It's a populating process to me. I just thought
No,
that was
I've always had the thing I love is when I have an empty studio that I can fill up, but now they
Yeah.
just get filled up.
Well, I have one last question. If we have
Good.
about 3 more
yeah,
minutes.
good. Good.
And this was for Marie, but I'm interested from all of you. How do you set up your paintings, your position in relationship to the work or the point of view?
Well, I mean, the framework for my painting is landscape, you know, the genre is landscape. So I set it up by regarding the canvas in relationship to my own body and starting with a horizon line. And once the horizon line is set up, then my imagination starts to go to work as to what is happening on the ground plane, what's happening in the sky plane, and what kind of specifics are going on. And sometimes I will relate to an actual event that I've read about or a news article that I've read about the environment. And that will help me to get the specifics and the color going. I mean, I would say too that because it's landscape, you know, it carries like, you know, above and the middle and below, which is, you know, symbolic of the underworld, you know, the plane we're living on now and the ascension, you know, and the heavens. And I'm really, you know, interested in like what's going on in the sky plane, what is going on underneath the earth as well as on the plane. So that's, I mean, that's like I'm setting up, like trying to grasp the complexity of the landscape and just like using the horizon line as a grounding point.
So every painting that you do, you begin with a horizon line.
Mhm.
That's very interesting to me. So you've got a very distinctive, you know, you're doing a landscape every time you paint.
Yeah,
That's how you work, yeah,
and it's just a space and then I start filling it up.
right. Well, I
Filling
did
it
read-
with stuff.
Is there anything that either of you do automatically as sort of a part of a ritual to begin? I mean, in a way, or you don't have a horizon line or an automatic
Oh,
thing?
no, I have a collection of rocks that I throw on the thing and look at the color. And
Oh,
the other one is, and Marie was with me one time when we did this, I just throw color on a little square and look at that for a long time and it moves me from there.
Mhm.
mhm.
And actually, like that's kind of like magic too, you know, random magical kind of talisman stuff. I do that too. Like the very first lines after the horizon line is projected fragments of leaves or stones or rocks or bark. And I project it and just start drawing. So the space is completely activated. But it's kind of a way to get a random contour line throughout it.
I remember a long time ago, Maggie, you and I were talking, and we had a conversation about, I forget how this came up, but that I do, since my paintings are narrative, you know, I'll do something that's personal. The content is personal, or it's a Bible story, or it's the fact that my mother died, or something. And I said, and your work is always, it sort of has it's not exactly like what she's saying, but it's similar. It's like there are certain things you're going to do in every painting. And I said, it seems like maybe what you're doing is going deeper and deeper into that one space. And rather than moving from one thing to the next. Listen, I just want to thank all of you guys for coming. This was really, as I knew it would be, exciting and illuminating and fun. And so, you know, Anne and Marie and Maggie, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I know everybody out there appreciates it too.
Well, I appreciate you, Peggy, and
Yeah.
I really appreciate all the research that you did. You really did your homework and studied all of us and carefully looked at our work and our websites. And I really appreciate all the questions and how well organized you were, and for bringing us together. I think this is a great idea.
This
Well,
is
thanks. I'm trying to make up for the fact that I slept through art history in college. So trying to learn about that now. And I want to thank also all the technical people behind the scene, the team that's keeping everything moving and producing, and Amy and Judith. And I'm going to say, Amy, back to you.
That was perfect. So great to see all of you. Every time I'm with any of you, I learn something new. And Peggy, thank you for rising to the challenge. When COVID hit and we'd been talking about this for about 4 months, I went to you and Judith and said, I think this is going to work on Zoom. Let's try this thing out. And it has not only worked, but flourished. And thank you for all that you do to put this together as well. And of course, to my team, you can't see them on here, but they've been amazing tonight. Thank you so much. And thanks for everybody coming out on a Tuesday night. I mean, this is our largest attendance. We had over 55 attendees, and we love being able to share art with you. It's our passion and our mission. We're going to share some information about the artist on the next card that will show up. So if you're ready, you can take a screenshot of that card and see how to get involved with any of these other artists you see here. And everyone have a great night.